The story began with the explanation of dungeons that were mysterious underground spaces that branched out like huge warrens. Some of the people explore these cavernous spaces to make their fortune, and they are called adventurers. And then there are those people who seek to defeat the dark forces lurking in a dungeon's depth, and these people are venerated as heroes. The protagonist is seen lying down on the ground in an injured state, thinking that he was proud to say that he had been an adventurer for 15 years, and then he got hired by a hero and his party to help fight a great evil, but just a second ago the hero he was working for betrayed him. The protagonist started cursing and wondered how he got into this mess. A few hours ago, the protagonist opened his eyes when a man kicked him and shouted at him to get the hell up and referred to him as Luke and called him a useless, third-rate adventurer. Luke asked the man what was the matter. The man asked him where the Dan Repel amulet was as he told him to set it up in the center of camp. Luke agreed with the man and explained to him that he did set it up just like he said. The man then pointed towards their bags and asked him how would he explain this then. Luke then looked at the bags and questioned what happened to their packs and realized that the food had been eaten. The man then shouted at him, asking him whose fault was that, and called him an incompetent lout, and then he punched him. Luke then asked him to wait a second as he didn't have a clue of what was going on. The man explained to him that he put it in the wrong place, and as a result all their packs were outside its area of effect. The man then called a girl named Julia and asked her how much food they have left. Julia replied to him by saying that even if they were careful, she doubted they would have enough to get back to the surface once they were done. The man angrily asked Luke if he heard that and asked him how was he going to fix this mess. Luke argued with the man, saying that he did exactly what he told him to do. The man asked him if he thought excuses were going to get him off the hook. Luke then asked him to look right there at the rocks that he stacked to make a pedestal at the center of the camp, and that meant the amulet was moved after he had set it down. Luke then remembered something and asked the man if last night when he was thirsty. He went over to the packs to get a drink and asked him if maybe he knocked something over when he did that. The man stuttered and mumbled that it was impossible something like this happened and uttered that it may or may not have happened. Luke then blubbered to him that if that was the case, he should not go around pointing fingers. Then a lady came from behind and used her paralyzed music on Luke, and he froze at his place. The lady then uttered what did it matter who was to blame, as the matter of greater importance was what would happen next, and then asked her sister if she agreed with her. Her sister hesitantly agreed with her. The lady then suggested that if there wasn't enough food, then they should reduce the size of their party. Luke asked her what was she trying to say. The lady then smirked and mumbled that after all, they had a prime candidate for a sacrifice and looked at Luke. Luke became shocked and wondered what she was saying. The man agreed with her and blubbered that it was good thinking and referred to her as Blank. Julia then exclaimed that with one fewer person, their supplies might last if rationed. Luke became shocked and wondered if they were kidding. The man then mumbled that losing a man whose only skill was repair wouldn't hurt them much, and continued by saying that as a final act of mercy, he would leave him with his sword for free. They all then left Luke there and went forward. Present time. Luke uttered that this was how he ended up like this, and he mumbled in relief that finally the paralysis magic wore off. He then started thinking that it was true that he was a third-rate adventurer and it had been 15 years, but he was still just an E rank, because the only skill he could use was repair, and also if he died here no one would miss him, not even the guild. But then he wondered if full screwing him over like this was going way too far, and then he made sure that he was not going to roll over and die down here, and determined himself to survive and escape this dungeon. Luke then stood up and exclaimed that all they left him was this shabby old sword. He then mumbled that first he had to fix up the blade, and was relieved when he realized that at least they didn't bother taking his bag of iron powder. He then took his bag of iron powder and used his skill repair, which fixed his sword. He then tested the blade of the sword and blubbered that this should work just fine, and then he started thinking that he was nowhere near powerful enough to fight any strong monsters, so he would have to avoid drawing attention to himself, and for him it didn't matter if it take him a few days. But he had to move carefully and quietly, and he would have to get out of this damn place. 2 weeks later, Luke in an exhausted state exclaimed that he was so hungry as he hadn't eaten a single thing since he set off alone, and he had survived so far thanks to the magic-imbued water that runs through the caves, but humans could only live for about a month without food, and he was long past the point of no return. He then remembered that people said that half the deaths in this dungeon were the people who couldn't bear the hunger, as they would break down and eat the poisonous lichen that grows on the wall. He then encouraged himself by thinking that he better hurry up, as if he kept going then maybe he would run into another party of adventurers. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a skeleton started attacking Luke, but he defended himself and killed the skeleton with his sword. He then took a breath and thought that it was close and explained that these old bones formed into an undead skeleton, and he was relieved that there was only one of them. He then noticed that his sword broke while defending himself from the skeleton, and he was out of the iron powder too. He then realized that using his repairing skill too many times on the sword without the proper materials made it brittle. He then started wondering, why the hell did this have to happen to him? He then used his repair skill on the blade of the sword, but he realized that his repair skill failed. But then, suddenly, the blade of the sword reformed itself, and then he questioned what happened just then. He then remembered that he heard someone break it down to him once, as they said that the repair momentarily decomposes both the object in need of fixing and the virgin material, and then after recomposing them, restore the object to its former shape. So maybe that meant that he could use that. Sometime before, when Luke was with the party, Luke mumbled to himself that that was not gonna work. Julia then asked him what was he doing. He replied to her by saying that he figured that if they broke the wall, they could make some progress. Julia explained to him that it was an absurd idea, even for him, as he would just damage the sword if he did that. He answered her by saying that even if it breaks, he would just get himself to fix it again, as he had to do something other than carry their bags. He then touched the wall and used his skill to break the wall. He became extremely happy, saying that he did it as he broke the wall, as not even their hero could burst through the walls, but he did. He then noticed the material that came off the wall that he broke and wondered what was this stuff, as it was not a rock and it felt like metal, and then he blubbered that this material should be hard enough to kill any enemies. Present time. Luke surprisingly wondered if his repair skill evolved somehow, as he still didn't really understand how or why, but if it has, then maybe he could use it for other things. However, it seemed unreal, but it was gotta be worth a try for him. He then used his repair skill on the sword and explained that the repair skill could not create something out of nothing, as it required an identical virgin material to compensate for the broken portion of an object, and if he did not had any material, the skill compensates seeing other parts of the object in question, and with a sword, any chips in the blade were restored using the unchipped portions, which was why repairing without spare material only makes his weapon brittle. And on top of that, not every material could be used to repair every object, as at the very least he needed the same type of substance as the broken portion. But what if he could use anything as a raw material, as if he could repair a sword using stone from a wall that not even a hero could break, then that sword would become the strongest weapon in the world. He then formed a sword with the material that came out of the wall, and then he wondered, what could he test it out on? He then took his other old sword and put it straight over to the wall, and then he attacked it with his new sword, which broke the old sword into half. Luke then noticed that there was not a single scratch on his blade, and he could bet that with this he could survive long enough to get out of here, and then he took some rubble from the wall with him. He then started moving forward and thought that even just opening holes in the walls and moving cautiously was miles better than what he was doing before, and also if he carried on using this skill, he should be able to find a way out of this cave. Luke then wondered if this evolved skill of decomposition and recomposition worked on the lichen too. He then tried using his repair decompose skill on the lichen, but then he realized that nothing happened because living things could resist magic, as all living things had an innate resistance to magical meddling thanks to their own intrinsic magic. He then mumbled that if that was the case, then if he could just hold the activation of the skill for a little longer. After some time he realized that he did get the lichen to decompose, but it was not very efficient, and he guessed that living things were hard to dismantle. And then he explained that the repair was not a skill that affected living things anyway, so he doubted that he would ever need to use it on one. He then distracted himself by saying that there was no time to hang around, as he had to find his way out of here. After walking for some time, he noticed that there were some stairs, and he became happy, as this meant that he was finally outside the dungeon. He became extremely excited, saying that he did it as he survived the dungeon, but then his stomach started growling, and he realized that he had to eat something, as he couldn't go without food much longer. He then plucked a grape from a tree. When he took it towards his mouth, he instinctively mumbled that he couldn't eat this because it was rotten, and he threw the grape on the ground. He then wondered how he knew it was rotten. Suddenly Luke heard a scream and started running towards the voice, thinking if someone was there. He then realized that the voice came from over there. He then saw two girls standing together from behind the bushes. One of the girls asked another one to get out of there and referred to her as Sylvia. Sylvia replied to her by saying that she couldn't leave her, and she referred to her as Sakura. Luke noticed them and blubbered that it looked like they were in the middle of a fight, but then he questioned whom they were fighting. Suddenly, a dragon came in front of the girls to attack them. Luke became shocked after seeing the dragon and exclaimed there was no way because dragons never leave their dungeons. He then looked towards Sakura and wondered what she was doing, and he also realized that her sword was broken, and then he thought that there was no way she could fight that dragon in her current state. Luke then determined himself, saying that he had to do something. He then took out a rock that he collected from the dungeon and threw it on the dragon and started running towards it to attack it. He then thought that the rock did absolutely nothing. He then called Sakura by calling her samurai and asked her to use his sword as according to him this might help her. She took his sword and uttered to him that she was in his debt, and then she swiftly went ahead and slashed the dragon with that sword. The dragon fell on the ground and Luke became happy saying she did it. He then went towards her and asked her if she was okay. Sakura replied to him by saying that she was very grateful for his help as thanks to him, they made it. Sakura then became dizzy and fell on the ground. Both Luke and Sylvia became worried. Luke held her in his arms and asked her to wake up. Sylvia started crying and requested Sakura to wake up. He then noticed that she was in a bad way as her wound looked fatal, and then he asked Sylvia if she had any healing skills. Sakura denied him and then asked him back if he had any healing skills. He apologized to her by saying that he had not a single one as all he could do was repair, but that would not work on a person. But then suddenly he remembered something and wondered if that was really true and thought that repair couldn't heal living things. Everybody knew that, but even though his decomposition was inefficient, it still did make the living lichen disintegrate back in the dungeon. He then explained that the skill dismantles the virgin material and the targeted area of the repair with magic, then recombines them to form the essential parts alone, restoring the object to its former shape, so if he used it on a human body, then it was worth a shot. He then realized that the injury was on the side of Sakura's torso and she hadn't been given any first aid, and neither Sylvia nor him had any other way of healing her. Luke then calmed himself down and remembered what he did back in the dungeon because there was a chance it would work. However, if he left her bleeding out like this, then she wouldn't survive. He mumbled that it was either sink or swim and continued by thinking that failing and regretting was 1,000 times better than not trying at all, and he requested her not to hate him if this didn't work. Sakura feebly mumbled as if she would hate him and requested him to do his worst. He then used his skill repair on her wound and noticed that it was happening again, and he encouraged himself to go just a little longer. He then thought that in 15 years he had seen countless adventurers sustain serious injuries, and he also had watched his comrades breathe their last while screaming that they didn't want it to die, and he couldn't do a single thing to help them, and it was maddening, heartbreaking, and painful for him, and he never wanted to feel any of those things again. He then exclaimed that it was true that he was useless, but he hadn't fallen so low that he would abandon someone in need, and that was why, at least in this moment, he wanted to save her. Luke opened his eyes and found himself lying on a bed. He wondered what happened and remembered that he used the skill, and then he might have passed out right after, and then he questioned where he was now. Sylvia noticed him and mumbled that he was awake. Luke then asked her where was he. She replied to him by saying that he was in her home, otherwise known as the Spring Leaves Inn, and then she informed him that he had been asleep for almost half a day, and told him that she was worried about him. He apologized to her, saying that he was flat broke so he would just hurry and get out of her hair. She became flustered and blubbered to him that she didn't need money as he saved their lives after all. He became shocked and wondered what, but then he realized that if he guessed it from her point of view, then she owed him. He replied to her by saying that he really didn't do anything that grandiose, but still he thanked her for her kind words. Luke then asked her how the samurai was and continued by asking if she lived. Sylvia answered him by saying that Sakura was just perfect and thanks to him, she made a full recovery. He exclaimed that it was good to hear and thought that he would have never slept again if the person he tried to help had died. Sylvia then innocently called him uncle and asked him if he was an exceptionally strong healer. He became extremely disappointed after hearing uncle, but then he answered her by saying that he was just a third-rate E-rank adventurer as like he said before, his only skill was repair. Sylvia became confused and continued by saying that his repair skill was really good, but then suddenly she was interrupted by the growling of his stomach. He grabbed his stomach saying he thought he was dying. She worriedly asked him if she was hungry. He replied to her by saying that he had nothing but water for the last 2 weeks. She became shocked after listening to him and told him that she would fetch him something right away. Sylvia then brought him some food and he ate it, saying it was so good. She smiled and mumbled that she was glad and continued by saying that she was really shocked as she never thought that anyone would come to save them at the bottom of the dungeon. Luke questioned her regarding the bottom of the dungeon and continued by asking if weren't they out in front. She answered him by saying no, as they were 5 levels down. He became shocked listening to her. She asked him what happened. He then asked her to hold on for a second, and then he started thinking that they seemed to be getting their wires crossed here. He then told her that it might sound weird to her, and then went on to ask her what was the name of the place where they met. She replied to him by saying that it was the E-rank dungeon, the Sundial Forest. He then asked her what kind of dungeon was it. She answered him by saying that it was an open type, like a big amphitheater. Luke then started thinking that he was in the A-rank dungeon, the 1,000-year passage to hell, and then he realized that it meant that the levels of the 2 dungeons were linked. He then asked her what were they doing that far down. She replied to him by saying that they went there to harvest medicinal herbs. He then questioned about herbs and told her that it was dangerous for novices to head into a dungeon alone, and then he wondered if anyone didn't try to stop them. She answered him by saying no and continued by saying that the Sundial Forest was only officially recognized as a dungeon last year, and people had always gone there to gather herbs and vegetables. He then inquired if it was recognized as a dungeon, then that meant that there were monsters, as there was an honest-to-God dragon. Sylvia told him that they had no idea that there was a dragon in it, as the guild didn't post any warnings either. He then asked her if she was saying that the guild wasn't aware of it, something that huge. She confidently replied to him by saying that they weren't aware, as the guild person she told couldn't believe their ears. Luke then started thinking that he could have understood the lack of notice if it had been a weaker monster, but he couldn't imagine that the guild would fail to warn for a dragon. He then mumbled that he guessed there was nothing for it if they didn't know there was a dragon, and then he apologized to her as he didn't mean to sound like he was blaming her. Sylvia flustered, saying that it was really alright, as she knew he was just worried about them. She then asked him what his name was. She then introduced herself by telling him that her name was Sylvia of the Spring Leaves Inn. He introduced himself back by saying that his name was Luke of the White Wolf Wood. He then explained that commoners like them didn't have any family names, so mostly they just used the name of their birthplace or their trade. Sylvia then asked him why was he in the dungeon, but then she noticed that he fell asleep. She then went towards him and covered him with a blanket, and then she whispered thank you to him and left. The next morning, Luke was in the bathtub, and he said with relief that now he felt more alive. He then started thinking that according to Sylvia, the place they were in, the Green Hollow, was renowned for its hot springs. However, he thought it was strange to be able to bathe so early in the morning, but it made sense when they had constant access to hot water. He then wore his clothes and came out of the hot spring, saying that now he feels refreshed. He then explained that this whole place was a relaxation resort, and there were lots of food stalls and restaurants on the main street, and it was the perfect place, given how exhausted in body and spirit he was. Sakura called Luke from behind, saying that she was so relieved to see him looking well, and told him that Sylvia said to her that he was out exploring. He then realized that she was that samurai, and then continued by asking if her name was Sakura, and added by questioning about her and her wounds. She replied to him by saying that thanks to him she made a full recovery. He then asked her how crazy was it that she ran into a dragon while gathering herbs. She answered him by saying that it shames her that she, a warrior in training, had to rely on him to save herself, and she continued by saying that if her favorite katana had not been broken, then maybe she could defeat it. But then, that was just an excuse. Luke then asked her where her sword was now. She became confused and showed him her katana. After looking at the broken sword, he was relieved as she had both the pieces of the sword, and told her that he could repair this without any problem. Sakura asked him if he could really do that, and continued by saying that she would be very grateful to him, and continued by telling him that there was no weapon shop in this town, so she had been stuck without a sword. He asked her not to worry, as repair was his specialty. Luke then glanced at the sword while Sylvia was watching them from outside. Sakura noticed her and asked what was up with her. Sylvia became shocked and mumbled that she was sorry, but she was just so curious, and then asked Luke if he minded her watching. He answered by saying yes, and continued by saying that it was not exactly riveting, and then he asked her if people wouldn't miss her at the work. She replied back by saying that it was fine as she was on a break. He understood her and exclaimed that he should get started. He then touched the sword and realized that the blade's strength was decreased by 30%, and the blade's metal was maximum hard steel. Also, the main material was low-carbon steel, and there were over 1,000 layers of steel in the surface, and also noticed that it was a combination of low, medium, and high-carbon steel. And then he thought that the imprecise repairs had caused a strength imbalance, and most significantly, there was a 12% reduction in cutting ability. Luke then became shocked when he realized that he could read the sword's information in his mind, and remembered that this happened before when he was going to eat that berry in the woods, but he knew it was rotten just by touching it. He then thought that this part of his skill had also evolved, and if he had to give it a name, then it would be analysis. He then explained that he analyzed the condition of what he wanted to repair, then he decomposed the portion in need of restoration and the virgin material, and then finally he recomposed them together for a successful repair, and therefore each individual stage of the repair skill had become its own independent ability. He then used his ability on the broken sword and repaired it and told Sakura that it was done. She asked him if it was already done. She then took back her sword and mumbled that it was incredible, and she appreciated him by saying that he was a repair master. Luke then became flustered and started thinking that it was the only skill that he knew how to use. Sakura then blubbered to him that she must pay him. He denied her and asked her not to worry about it, and continued by telling her that if she was in training, then she might not have much money, and continued by saying that she also saved his life, and therefore he asked her to consider this a thank you. She became happy after listening to him and thanked him very much for his help. He then asked her if she had another way of earning money. She replied by saying no. He then asked her why she didn't give adventuring a try. Sakura became confused after hearing about adventuring. He explained to her that she had to take on quests when she wanted, so she could choose her jobs and schedule. She said that it sounded perfect for her current situation. Luke then asked Sylvia if she said before that there was a guild house in this town. She replied to him by saying yes, and continued by telling him that her childhood friend worked at the reception desk there. Luke then stated that he also needed to drop by the guild on business. Luke then agreed with everyone and stated that they should head to the adventurer registration. At the guild house, the receptionist welcomed them and then noticed Sylvia and asked her what was she doing here at this time of the day. She replied to her by saying that she brought someone who had some business with the guild. Sylvia then introduced the receptionist as Marita to Luke. Marita looked at him and said that he was a new face and continued by saying that she gives discounts to handsome young men. He then wondered if it wasn't that more like what a barmaid would say. Marita apologized to him and asked him if he was there for a quest or to register with the guild. He answered her by saying that he was already an adventurer and informed her by pointing at Sakura that she was the one who would like to register. Sakura bowed down and told her that she was only a novice, but then she requested her to let her join the guild. Marita informed her that everyone was a novice around here because the local danger levels were low. As a result, only newbies came there from all over. She then told her that she just needed her to fill out this form and asked her to consider it as her very first step as an adventurer. Sakura complied with Marita's request. She then started filling up the form while Luke looked at her thinking that this took him back 15 years, and then he wondered if he was as eager as Sakura and everyone else in here. Marita then stated that she would now go through the basics with her and then started telling her about the adventurer ranks, and then she informed her that there were 6 ranks, from A to F, and everyone, regardless of ability, starts out as an F rank. She continued by explaining that the F rankers might not take part in dungeon raids, and once she had completed a number of simple quests, she would rise up to rank E. Marita also told her that E was the lowest real adventurer rank and explained that from that point on, the guild would evaluate her and would decide when she progressed to the next rank. Sakura then inquired what were the benefits of ranking up. Marita replied by saying that that was a great question as it was very proactive, and continued by telling her that the higher her rank, the more dungeons she could enter and the more quests she could take on. She also informed her that dungeons were also ranked from A to E, and added that the adventurers may only enter a dungeon equal to or lower than their own rank, and for parties, the dungeon levels were based on the rank of the party leader. She then told Sakura that if she got her rank up, she would have a lot more choices, and then she asked her to do her best. Marita then looked at Sakura's form and became shocked and confused. Sakura then asked her if she left anything out. She answered by saying no, as it was nothing like that, and then asked her back to double check if the one who slew the dragon from the 5th dungeon level the other day was her. She replied by saying yes and questioned her if didn't she already told her that. Marita answered her by saying no, as they only said that she was someone who had business with the guild. She then informed Sakura that once they report this to their main office, They would give her a cash bonus, and she would now get the paperwork started. Sakura thanked her. Marita mumbled to her that that was an amazing feat, as she never thought she could cut down a dragon in one hit. Sakura became flattered and told her that she was still just a beginner, and continued by saying that she was only able to slay the dragon thanks to the sword that Luke made for her. Marita wondered if that was so and then asked her if they would be splitting the reward. Sakura agreed with her, as she didn't defeat the monster on her own after all. Luke looked around and realized that they were drawing a lot of attention, and he started thinking that even hearing her say it out loud, it still really hadn't sunk in yet, but there was no reason for him not to try to get some benefit from this. Luke then asked them if he could cut in their conversation for a second, and stated that the truth was that he wanted to take a break from adventuring, and then he asked her if there was a good spot anywhere in this town to open a weapon shop. Luke then started thinking that there was no way the newbie adventurers would ignore a rumor this tasty. Marita asked if he inquired about the weapon shop. He agreed with her. The people in the guild heard their conversation and started talking among themselves that the guy who made a sword strong enough to kill a dragon in one hit was setting up a shop in this town. He then asked her if Green Hollow didn't have its own weapon shop yet. Marita answered him by saying that he was right about that, and told him that the best building for a weapon shop was, but he then interrupted her by saying that if he needed to buy the building, then she could use his portion of the reward. She explained to him that money was not the problem here, as the building was crumbling where it stands, and it was just a little more than a dilapidated ruin. Luke wondered if that was all, as he could fix that up easily. After all, repair was his area of expertise. Sylvia then asked her if she was talking about the place on the outskirts of town. Marita replied to her by saying yes, as they couldn't leave that place to rot, and she already thought that she would ask the mayor about it. Sylvia became worried, as that place surely was beyond saving. Luke heard that and hesitantly started thinking that he was sure he could fix that, probably. Sakura then called him and offered that if that was his plan, then he should take her share of the reward as well. Luke became confused and told her that she should keep that for herself. She blubbered to him that it was fine, as she would be earning money working as an adventurer, and then she requested him to use all the reward money for this. He appreciated her by saying that he was grateful to her, and started thinking to himself that he felt like no matter what he said here, she wouldn't change her mind. Sylvia then suggested that if that was the case, then they should make it an advance payment for urgent repairs. Luke wondered about advance. Sakura understood her, and then she asked him if it was a payment for service, then he could accept it, and continued by saying that she also had one other request. She then continued and asked him to make her a katana just like that sword, one strong enough to slay a dragon. Luke then started thinking that that was an arrangement he could agree to, as having Sakura give him money for no reason felt awkward as hell to him. He then complied with her request, and told her that they now have a contract, and continued by saying that this made her his very first customer. Sakura agreed with him and told him that she was counting on him, and then they both shook hands. Luke then explained that in this way he took a hiatus from his work as an adventurer and began the scramble for his new life as the owner of a weapon shop. Luke, Sakura, and Sylvia then reached the rotten building at the outskirts of the town. After looking at the building, Sakura mumbled that this was awful. Sylvia agreed with her. They then went inside the building, and Sylvia told Luke that it had been vacant for a while, and also informed him that one day a huge gale brought a huge tree down on it. Sakura also blubbered that everything inside was quite broken too. Luke then stated that they would not know until they tried, and he continued by saying that he would give it a shot. Sylvia got confused and asked him what he meant by giving it a shot. He answered her by saying that he meant repairing, of course. However, he had never tried it on something this big, but he was hopeful. Luke then started thinking that the target area for the repair was the entire building, and realized that he could use fallen trees to compensate for the parts that have rotted through. He then activated his skill Repair. Sylvia became shocked seeing it. Sakura became surprised and mumbled that the building was fixing itself. After some time, Sylvia appreciated him, saying that he had restored the building perfectly, and told him that he was incredible, but then she noticed that he was in pain, and then she worriedly asked him if he was okay. He replied to her by saying that he was fine, and then he started thinking that restoring a whole house sure did take a ton of power. He then exclaimed that a weapon shop needed something to sell, therefore he couldn't get worn out already. She asked him what he was saying, and then she asked him to at least let her clean the place, and told him that if he did everything himself, then he would collapse again. Sakura also excitedly blubbered that she wanted to help too. Luke agreed to them and apologized to them to put them to work. He then stated that he would start with the shop stock then. He then went towards a box filled with broken weapons and armors. He used his skill repair to fix these weapons and armors and mumbled that to him. These were treasure. He then showed the repaired sword to Sylvia. She became awestruck and said that it was like a brand new sword, and then she realized that it was cheaper to repair broken weapons than to stock the shop with new items. Luke told her that she got it and exclaimed that that was why a weapon shop was perfect for him. He then continued by saying that all they needed now was an eye-catching feature display, and then he took a sword. Sylvia became confused. He explained to her that he used the sword that slew the dragon for publicity. So if he didn't have wares like that, the customers would be disappointed. She understood and agreed with him. She then questioned him if he would be able to make more amazing swords like that. He answered her by saying no, as the ones he was putting in the shop would be replicas. He then started thinking that he disintegrated the virgin material he picked up in the dungeon into fine powder, and making a sword like that with this one tiny bag of powder was impossible. Sakura noticed that bag and asked him if that was the same material he used for the sword. He replied to her by saying yes, and continued by telling her that this stuff increased the strength of the blade, and mumbled that his acquisition channels were a trade secret, though. He then used the material from the bag and used his skill repaired to fix a sword. Sylvia looked at the sword and stated that it was so beautiful as its shine had a very different quality from the other swords. He then encouraged himself to repair the rest. He then thought that after he finished getting ready to open, he would need to think about how to procure materials. Sakura then told him that she was surprised, as she never thought this was his business with the guild. He replied to her that he had given this idea a lot of thought, as she told him that there was no weapon shop in this town, and then he asked her what did the newbie adventurers here needed the most. Sylvia excitedly answered him by saying weapons and armors. Luke then asked her if she was from a merchant family. She told him that her grandma always said that one should find a gap in the market. Sakura then asked him if he wasn't an adventurer, and continued by asking why he was an adventurer until now when he was so skilled at restoring items with repair. He then realized that he had never told them about what happened before they met. He then answered her by saying that he only realized he could do this very recently, and continued by telling them about the truth of what happened with him. After listening to him, both Sakura and Sylvia became shocked, and Sakura mumbled that it was so mean. Sylvia too exclaimed that he was an awful person, utterly awful, and thought that she wanted to smack him right in his evil face. Sakura blubbered that she would have cut him down right where he stood. Luke thought that if he said that he was a hero, then they would get even angrier. He then asked them to keep all that aside, and told them that the reason he wanted to keep being an adventurer was longing. He then explained to them that when he was a kid, a party of adventurers would come through his village, and after hearing tales of their fantastic adventures, planted the seed of longing inside him. He was sure that the adventurers embellished most of them, but even so, he couldn't let go of his yearning to be an adventurer. He continued by saying that his parents told him that it was a stupid idea, and he rebelled against them to the point that he ended up leaving his village, and that was why he stayed an adventurer all this time, even as a perpetual E-ranker. Sakura then asked him if he ever regretted his decision. He replied to her saying not even a little, as he did it because he enjoyed it after all. However, this last quest was a wake-up call for him, and it was a good opportunity for him to start afresh. He added by saying that he could thank that quest for his ability, and now he could live a comfortable, quiet life as a weapon seller. He said that that was right, as this was something brand new, and then he asked them to work hard to get the shop ready. They both complied with his request. Luke then looked at his notes, and he remembered that he had ordered the sign and mumbled that when he would get back, he would start repairing the stock he just got. Suddenly, a man came to his shop and called him. The man then asked him if he was the one who saved the girl from the Spring Leaves Inn. He replied to him by saying yes, that was him only. The man then told him that he knew the family who ran that inn pretty well, and then he gave him some food to like, saying that these were for him. He became surprised and asked the man if he was sure he didn't want anything for this. The man replied to him by saying that he didn't want anything, as it was his treat. The man then told him that a lot of customers were really looking forward to his shop, and he then wished good luck to him for setting up the shop, and then he left. Luke started thinking that when he was adventuring, no one ever expected much from him or thanked him for anything, and then he realized that it was not a bad feeling after all. He then ate the food given by the man and stated that it was so good. Luke then noticed that some kids were surrounding Sakura while she explained to the kids that sword arts weren't for show. The kids excitedly mumbled to her that no one would care and asked her to show them some more, as sword arts were cool. She hesitantly agreed to them and told them that she would only do it once more. She then took out her sword and sliced a piece of wood. All the kids were awestruck while Luke shockingly thought that she used 2 slashes in an instant and continued by thinking that one needed more than just speed to pull off a stunt like that. One needed technique too, and just as he thought, Sakura must be a pretty skilled sword wielder. Sakura proudly told the kids that that was a piece of cake for her. Luke then started thinking about what happened to sword arts aren't for show. The kids started appreciating her by saying that it was so cool and asked her how she did that. Sakura then turned around and noticed that Luke was watching her. She became embarrassed and asked him how long had he been standing there. He replied to her by saying that he was there since she said sword arts weren't for show. She then blushed and explained to him that in her home, displaying her skills wasn't done, therefore receiving open praise like this was extremely rare. He understood her and mumbled that she was just excited to have an audience. He then asked her to try some of the food that the man gave him, telling her that the owner of that stall gave him them for free. She thanked him and took a bite from it and said that it was very good. He then asked her if she really loved to eat. She became embarrassed, wondering if that was that obvious, and then she exclaimed that it had been one humiliation after another since she met him. He stated to her that he thought it was nice as it was good to keep her cool, but it was also important to let go. She thanked him for saying so, and then she told him that her hometown was very strict, and that was why when she was here, she always spread her wings a little too much. He then questioned her if she was a warrior in training and continued by asking if she was planning to stay in Green Hollow for a while. She answered him by saying that actually she was returning home for a short visit and she would leave tomorrow. He was surprised that she was leaving that soon. She explained to him that she was not staying there as she was thinking of making this town her home base, and to do that, she needed to return and collect something. Luke then asked her if it was something she left behind. She replied to him by saying that there was a particular material she wanted him to use to make a katana for her. Luke understood her, and he realized that he would be making her katana after her return. Sakura agreed with him, and then she apologized to him that she couldn't help him with the preparations. He smiled and told her that she didn't have to worry about that, as he would surprise her with the most splendid shop she had ever seen. She complied with him and blubbered that she was really looking forward to it. Next day, a worker asked Luke if he wanted him to hang the sign here. Luke answered by saying yes, and told him that right there would be great. Sylvia then asked him if he took the shop's name from his birthplace, as he was from White Wolf Wood, if she remembered right. He agreed with her, saying that he couldn't think of anything else, and he continued by saying that he had been meaning to thank her for all her help, and he told her that he was really grateful to her. Sylvia exclaimed to him that it was totally fine as he did save her life, and mumbled to him that right now they should just be happy that so many people were waiting excitedly for him to open. He agreed with her and stated that she was right, as this was where it all starts. The worker then shouted and told him that the sign was all set. He then mumbled that with this, the last of the prep was complete. After some time, both Luke and Sylvia welcomed everyone and announced that today was the grand opening of the White Wolf Arms. After opening the shop, Luke started thinking that it had not been long since he opened this shop, but he got a lot of business, and he had also gotten used to dealing with customers. Suddenly a customer came up to him and asked him if he happened to have a sword for 1 florin. He replied to him by saying that 1 florin was more than enough for one of their regular iron swords, and then he showed the swords to him. The customer became relieved and bought a sword. He thanked the customer for shopping with them. Then Sylvia came into the shop and asked him if he was busy as usual. He looked at her and asked her what was in her hand. She answered him by saying that it was a present from Marita, and told him that she said that everyone was overjoyed because they have grown more powerful thanks to the materials they had harvested from that dragon's corpse. He then realized that that was what it's for and asked her if Marita runs the bar as a side business. She replied by saying yes and told him that it was a part thank you, part belated shop-warming gift. She then questioned him if had sold any of his featured replicas yet. He answered her by telling her that he had sold none so far, as they were not exactly priced to sell quickly. And for now, they were just decorations. Sylvia looked at the price of swords and noticed that it was 1 guilder, and then she exclaimed that most people couldn't pay that much, and then she asked him if these were only replicas, and she bet that he could charge even more for the actual sword. Luke agreed to that and guessed that he could probably charge several sovereigns for it. She became shocked after listening to multiple sovereigns, as it was as much as ordinary folk earned in a year. He explained himself by saying that he couldn't make another sword like that one so easily, as he would have to go back to the 1,000-year passage to hell to get more of that material, but then he couldn't get in without an A-ranker leading the party, and for now it was pretty much impossible. Therefore, he couldn't go and collect more of that material, and he also didn't intend to sell it just now anyway. Sylvia mumbled that that was too bad as it seemed like a bit of a waste. He then exclaimed that it was not like there were adventurers with that kind of cash to drop on a sword. Suddenly, two men came inside his shop, and one of them asked Luke if he was the owner here. Another man asked him if this would be the establishment with the famous Dragon Slayer sword. He answered them by saying yes. One of the men then told him that if he had that sword, then he would very much like to purchase it. Luke then informed them that he did have a few similar blades in stock over there. The man then noticed those swords and asked him if those were just poor quality replicas. Luke became shocked after hearing that, while the man told him that he would like to buy the original sword. Luke then informed that he was afraid he hadn't put the original up for sale. The man then laughed and asked him if he wanted to keep it as a souvenir, as he could understand that, and continued by saying that he had reasons for wanting that blade, and then he ordered the other man to show him the money. The man complied with his order and showed Luke the money. Luke became shocked after seeing the gold sovereigns and that 5 of them, and then he wondered who was this guy. The man then asked him if that was not enough, and then he signaled the other man to give him more money. The man then took out more money and asked him how about this much money. The man then smiled and asked Luke if they could come to an agreement now. Luke stood there confused while those men left the shop after giving him the money. After the men left, Luke took a sigh of relief and mumbled that that was exhausting while Sylvia started counting the money. She then shockingly told him that that was 10 sovereigns, and then she asked him if weren't those 2 men were adventurers and mumbled that she had never seen so much money before. Luke answered her by saying that he doubted that because no adventurer could shell out this much money, and then he guessed that they might have been knights or noble envoys, and continued by saying that's the very least. The blond man seemed to be a real connoisseur, as he saw right through the quality of those other swords. Sylvia agreed with him by saying that he was definitely no ordinary person, and then she wondered why would someone like that come to Green Hollow. Suddenly Sakura came inside the shop and mumbled to them that it had been a while, and both Luke and Sylvia became happy and excited to see her. Sylvia rushed to her and shook her hand, saying that she was finally here, as she was getting so tired of waiting because she missed her so much. Sakura apologized to her, as it took quite a while to get home. Luke told her that she was back earlier than expected, and then he asked her if she brought the material. She answered him by saying yes, and continued by saying that she really wanted to show it to him, so she came straight here. He mumbled that she had good timing as he was about to break for lunch, and then he asked her if he could take a look once they had eaten. She agreed with him and blubbered that she would really appreciate it. They all then sat down to have lunch, and after taking a bite, Sakura happily exclaimed to Sylvia that her cooking was the best she had ever tasted. She then stated that she was astounded by the place, as it was even better than he imagined, and it also seemed like he was getting a lot of custom too. He agreed with her and told her that he was also getting customs from people who weren't adventurers as well. Sylvia then informed her that Luke was even hired to restore some of the buildings in town. Sakura happily blubbered that that was amazing. Sylvia told her that it was all because he fixed this ramshackle old place up so well. He then mumbled that one could say that the shop itself was his biggest advertisement. Sakura proudly exclaimed that she expected nothing less from him, and from the looks of things, he would earn back his startup fees in no time. He then informed her that he actually had earned most of that actually. She became shocked and asked him if he really did that. Sylvia then asked her to remember the sword she used to defeat the dragon because it just now was sold for 10 sovereigns. She became amazed after listening to that and mumbled that she would be set for life with that amount. Luke became flustered and blubbered that that was taking austerity a little too far. She then asked who on earth were those people. He answered her by saying that they often heard of rich folks wanting a weapon with a lot of prestige, and maybe that was also his deal, and continued by saying that they could just guess, but they couldn't know the truth, and then he asked Sakura to talk about her blade. Sakura then took out a stone and told him that this was the material she wanted him to use to make her katana, and she also told him that they call this material hierocane. Luke exclaimed that he had never heard of it. Sylvia thought that the stone was so pretty red and mumbled that it looked like a gemstone, but it was actually a metal. Sakura then stated that one of the goals of her journey was to find someone to forge a katana out of this metal. He then asked her if no one in her hometown could do it. She answered him by saying that she was afraid not as even in the East. Its knowledge was lost, and no new armor or tools could be made from hierocane. He then asked her if she was sure she wanted to entrust something so valuable to him, as it was such a precious metal. She said of course, as there was no one she would rather entrust it to. Luke understood her and told her that this was complex, so it might take a little time. She asked him what complexity. He told her that the only skill he had was repair, so he couldn't make a sword out of this stuff right away. Sylvia agreed with him by saying that repair only restored an object to its original state. He then explained to them that he was using the memory of the original object's shape to make it whole again. Sakura then wondered if he couldn't create a blade from the metal ore alone. He exclaimed to her that it was not impossible and then continued explaining that if he recomposed half the ore bit by bit into an existing katana until it learned the shape and that he decomposed the katana and the rest of the core and then recompose it all. If he did that, then he could make her a 100% pure Heiarokane blade, and he admitted that it was kind of like a cheat workaround. Sakura excitedly asked him if he could do that and continued by asking if it was really going to be possible for real. He answered her by saying that his theory was sound, but he had never actually tried it. She then requested him to do it as soon as he could. She then gave him her existing katana. He hesitantly asked her if she was sure about it. She requested him to first make her a 50% Heiarokane blade and then afterwards remake it to 100%. Luke blubbered that if that was what she wanted, then he would better not fall short of her expectations. He then stated that first up he would try a 50-50 split of the original katana and the Heiarokane. He then used his skill, and both Sakura and Sylvia looked at it and became amazed. Sylvia mumbled that it had a beautiful color. Sakura also blubbered that this was amazing as it was as pink as cherry blossoms. Luke exclaimed that combining it with the regular metal like this lightened the color. Sakura then excitedly asked him if she could take the katana outside for a whirl. He allowed her and asked her to just watch out for his other customers. He then mumbled that she didn't look like it, but Sakura was a big kid at heart. Sylvia laughed and told him that it made him sound like a dad. He then asked her if she called him old. They both then went outside to look at Sakura. Sakura then used her skill fire. Luke then asked her if she could use fire. She replied to him by saying that it was still only a low-level skill, so she couldn't use it for a direct attack, but people said that items made from Heiarokane conducted fire and amplified its intensity, and then she showed them if she did this, then she could see if the process worked. Luke became impressed and asked her if they should test it on something, and then he asked her how about this chunk of wood. He then threw that piece of wood, but warned her to watch out for the shop window. She sliced the wood with her fire sword, and it had a very great impact, and everyone there was shocked. She happily mumbled to Luke that this was incredible, and she thanked him. Luke and Sylvia stood there in shock, while Sylvia asked him didn't she just call that a low-level skill. He afraidly agreed with her. He then started thinking that he might have just made the most absurdly overpowered weapon in history, and then he wondered if one used a higher-level fire skill on it, then just how strong could it become. He then started thinking that even a short time ago, he never would have imagined that he would be capable of making something like this. He then remembered when he, a perpetual E-ranker, was finally chosen to join a hero's party. It was just to be their pack mule, and in the end, they left him for dead, and it seemed so unreal that someone like him could make a weapon like this. Sylvia then happily mumbled that this was just what she had expected from a sword he made, and Sakura also looked thrilled with it. Sakura then requested him to make her a short sword as well because she wanted to dual-wield it with her katana. He then started thinking that he had never thought he would have friends who appreciate his skills like this. He happily complied with her request and asked her to leave it to him. After some time in the shop, a customer thanked Luke and told him that he would come back if it broke again. He complied with him, saying that he would be waiting for their business. Luke then realized that he was all done with today's job, and while walking he thought that he had been burning with so much creative energy he couldn't sit still, and he would maybe head back to the shop and fix some more weapons. He then remembered that Sakura told him that she wanted a short sword, and then he wondered that maybe he could make it now and surprise her with it, and he might try changing the ore ratio a little while he was at it too. All of a sudden, some men in armor called him from behind, and asked him if he was Luke of the White Wolf Wood, and asked him if they could have a moment of his time. However, he became afraid and confused seeing those men. The men in armor told Luke that they were the Order of the Silver Wings. Luke wondered what Silver Wings were, however, he hesitantly asked them if there was something he could do for them, as he usually handles repair requests at the shop. The person in armor then shouted at him, asking how long he would keep playing dumb as the evidence against him was only mounting. Luke apologized to them, saying that he didn't know what they were talking about. The person in armor then asked him why was he averting his eyes. She then grabbed his shirt and told him not to underestimate her and called him a low-life criminal. Another man in armor stopped her and referred to her as Garnet and mumbled to her that if she interrogated him, the truth would get twisted lethally. She called another man Felix and asked him to shut up. Felix then angrily asked her if she wanted him to remind her who was the commanding officer, or should he just report her to Lord Carmen for disobeying orders. Garnet became flustered and asked him to leave her brother out of this. She then apologized to Luke for her rough greeting. They then took out their helmets and Felix introduced himself as the commander of the order to him, and he requested him to come with them as he had a matter of great importance to discuss with him. Luke then inquired what would happen if he were to refuse. Another tall man in armor replied to him by saying that it was an excellent question and told him that that would be obstruction, so they would do worse than yank his shirt. Luke understood them and mumbled that if that was the case, then they should continue this in the shop as they stick out like sore thumbs out there in the street. Suddenly Sylvia came there and asked Luke what was going on as she heard shouting. Luke noticed her and blubbered to her that he had no idea and he himself was about to ask them, although it didn't seem good, and then he asked her not to worry as they were just going inside to talk. She then wondered how could she possibly not worry, and then exclaimed that she was coming with him if they didn't mind, and then she dashed away saying that she would quickly go and tell her mother. Luke tried to stop her and then asked Felix if it was okay for a kid like her tags along. Felix replied to him by saying that it was fine as she would just have to give consent to be his official witness, and continued by saying that it seemed like she was quite worried about him. He apologized to him for the hassle. After some time, they all went inside the shop and started talking. Felix then told Luke that they were aware of what took place inside the dungeon, and then he asked him if he could describe each member of the hero's Falcon's party. He wondered how he could describe them. He told him that just his personal impressions would do. He then started describing to Felix. He exclaimed that Falcon tended to be overconfident as whenever he made a mistake out of pride, he would use his numerous skills to try and fix it. He then started describing Julia, the knight, who was Falcon's childhood friend and his lover, and she would do whatever he asked, and she only ever stood up to him when it concerned other women. He then continued describing about the white mage, Blanche, who was the one that proposed that they should abandon him as she always rubbed people the wrong way, and then he mumbled that for the last member, he was not really sure what to say. Felix then asked if the last member would be the white mage, Nora, and continued by asking if he had some kind of run-in with her. Luke answered by saying no, as it was just the opposite because she had so little presence that he honestly couldn't describe what she was like. Felix understood him. Luke then asked them if he could ask why they wanted to know about them as he was not sure where they were going with this. Felix complied with him and mumbled that he would get right to it, and then he told him that currently Falcon and his party were currently missing in action, and the Order of the Silver Wings was to investigate their whereabouts. Luke became confused as he hadn't heard anything about them being missing, as he told the guild that they were probably still inside the dungeon. Felix then explained to him that the fact that he left the dungeon without his party has led to accusations of foul play. He then quoted that the ministers sponsoring Falcon as a hero claimed that there was no doubt the hero Falcon died due to betrayal by Luke of the White Wolf Wood, and the best course of action would be to interrogate the traitor for details. Sylvia angrily stood up saying that it was absurd as Luke wasn't that kind of a person at all. Felix asked her to calm down as he understood her feelings, and he requested her to allow him to finish. He then continued by telling them that the ministers believed that Luke stole the hero's weapon, and they were appointed to retrieve the so-called Dragon Slayer sword. Luke tried to say something when he noticed that the tall guy in armor was the same person who came to buy the sword yesterday, and now he understood how they had so much money as it was a political assignment. Felix then quoted that ultimately, the minister's reasoning had proved false, but now they have turned up a different problem, and that was that the sword he made contained mithril. Sylvia then asked Luke what mithril was. He replied to her by saying that it was a precious metal with a terrifying high magic affinity, and one needed permission from the royal palace to gather it, let alone sell it, and if not, the worst-case scenario was the death penalty. Sylvia became terrified after hearing about the death penalty, and then she asked him if he repaired that sword using the walls of the dungeon. He answered her by saying yes, and continued by saying that those caves must be composed of the stuff, at least in part, and he couldn't analyze it, probably because it was a metal he had never seen before. Felix mumbled that since his production of a mithril weapon was not intentional, he couldn't be charged, and if he really did make that sword from the dungeon walls, then no one could have known there would be a vein of mithril, and in order to prove that he must disintegrate part of the dungeon wall with them present as witness. Luke agreed with them and mumbled that if that would clear up any suspicion, then he would do it, and then he asked them how they could possibly think that he betrayed them. Felix told him that only the ministers thought that, as in terms of ability alone, he could believe it to be impossible. Luke then exclaimed that the short guard outside sure seemed to believe he was guilty. Felix then wondered if he was talking about Garnet and blubbered to him that he loathed mithril bootleggers, and that was probably why he took that attitude with him, and then he told him that they would escort him to the dungeon to gather rocks from the walls. Next day, Garnet cheerfully greeted Luke, saying that he was counting on him today. Luke stood there in confusion as he suddenly had a total change in attitude. However, this kindness seemed even weirder in comparison. They both then shook hands, and Garnet intentionally clenched his hand very hard, and Luke painfully called him a little dolt. Garnet mumbled to him that today they would bust his lies wide open. Suddenly, Sakura came there and intervened, asking what he was doing. He asked him to back off as the outsiders had no say in official business. She informed him that she was not an outsider as Felix gave her the permission to accompany them. Luke then told her that he was fine, and then he apologized to her to make her act as bodyguard and tour guide. She blubbered to him that it was nothing at all as she was happy to help him out. Garnet then commented on a typical E-ranker, always needing someone to protect him. This comment mentally hurt Luke. Felix then exclaimed to Garnet that they had spoken about this, but he still appeared unclear as if he overstepped. Then he would report him to Lord Carmen. Garnet subsided and mumbled that he would be serious from now on. Luke then asked him if he would listen to his boss, his big brother. He then asked how he knew that he was his brother. He replied to him by asking him to remember that when Felix said he would report him to Carmen, he said leave brother out of this, and he continued by saying that the vice commander of his order reports to the commander, hence his boss. Sakura too understood it. Garnet then wondered if he seriously remembered all those tiny details. He proudly answered him by saying that he did it because he was a perpetual E-ranker, but he was quite good at listening for useful information. Garnet blubbered that it was a shame as it was not an actual skill. The tall guy came towards them and seriously informed them that the vice commander was ready to set off. Luke complied with the tall guy and thought that this guy was really intense. They all then came across the remains of the dragon that Sakura slashed and a lot of adventurers in the Sundell forest. Felix noticed that all adventurers were wearing such light armor in a place where a dragon appeared, and then he wondered if they were courageous or foolhardy. Luke then mockingly asked Garnet if the reason he was in full armor was because he was scared of dragons. Garnet became annoyed and kicked him from behind, saying that he was not afraid. Luke then turned towards him and mockingly asked him not to worry as there had not been a single eyewitness report of another dragon. Garnet then angrily stated to him that he was not afraid and called him a scumbag and warned him not to mock him. Felix became disappointed in Garnet while Sakura mumbled that it almost looked like they could be friends. They all then went ahead and reached the 1,000-year path to hell. Felix then mumbled that a place like this was really linked with the other one, and now they would have to investigate the lower level of the dungeon too. Luke then blubbered that he thinks there was a wall at the bottom of these steps. Felix then asked him if this was the wall he used for the repair because at first glance it appeared to be merely stone, and if this was the part of the dungeon, then the walls should be virtually indestructible, and then he asked Garnet if he would do the honors. Garnet complied with his order, and then he looked towards Luke and told him that if he knocked this wall down, then he was a fraud, and then he asked him to prepare himself. Luke asked him to believe him that he was well aware of that. Garnet then suddenly used his skilled dash and kicked the wall with full power, but nothing happened. Felix then asked him what he thought. Garnet answered him by saying that its similarity to rock was superficial as inside it was a cluster of metal, and not even a hero could break through this stuff. Felix then asked Luke to go ahead. Luke also complied with him and started thinking that coming here took him back to the worst month of his life, but then he encouraged himself to just decompose some of this wall and then go home. He then activated his skill, and the wall of the dungeon broke and fell down. Felix became shocked seeing that he broke the dungeon wall so easily. He then told them that he then recomposed the rubble with a sword, and that was how he made the sword that slew the dragon, and that time he had no idea what the material was, mithril or otherwise. Felix then asked the tall guy to collect some of the debris and referred to him as Bradford. Bradford complied with his order. Felix then asked Luke to dismantle more of the wall at different points. Luke afraidly asked them if that was totally necessary, as he would really rather not go in any deeper. Felix then explained to him that they couldn't be certain of the composition of every wall, so they would need to take samples from multiple sites. Garnet then went up to him and mocked him by asking him what was wrong and wondered if he was scared. Luke then annoyingly asked him if he should abandon him to the same fate as he was. Felix ordered Garnet to stop it, and then he calmed Luke, saying that he understood his hesitation, but he would really appreciate his help as they were doing this for his sake only. Luke hesitantly agreed with him. After some time, they collected all the samples and Felix mumbled that much should be plenty, and then they all came out of the dungeon. Luke took a sigh of relief as they were finally out. Garnet stated that it was so dark and narrow and depressing, and then he asked him how the hell did he survive 2 weeks down there. He annoyingly answered him by saying that he wasn't down there for fun, while Sekiro tried to calm him down. Felix then stated that now they would take this medal home and would get it appraised, and the results might take some time, but they would contact him as soon as they heard anything. Luke thanked him and told him that he would be waiting. Sakura then called Felix and asked him why he didn't take some dragon bone home with him. Felix exclaimed that it was a great idea as it would make a nice souvenir for the other knights. Garnet started moving, saying that he didn't care and asked them to do what they liked as he was now heading home. Luke then called him from behind and asked him if he remembered the way back. Garnet told him that he was annoying, and then he asked him to butt out. Suddenly a dragon came there and put his leg on Garnet and crushed him. Luke became shocked and wondered what just happened, while Garnet fell on ground covered in blood. Everyone present there started running, saying that wyverns were coming, and they had to run for it, and they asked Felix and others for help as they didn't stand a chance against them. Felix called Bradford, and then he used his skill, Chains of Binding, and suddenly a lot of chains captured the dragons that were flying, and they all fell down on the ground. Luke became surprised seeing Bradford as he took down so many with just one skill. Suddenly Sakura used her skill, Swift Dash, and she jumped on the back of one of the dragons and slashed it from behind with her sword, and then she again jumped and killed another dragon. However, a dragon came behind her and Luke noticed that, and he shouted to her to look out, but all of a sudden Felix came there and used his skill to create a shield and saved her. Sakura exclaimed to him that she was in his debt. Felix noticed that dragon and realized that this dragon looked to be of a different ilk, and then he suggested that Bradford and him would provide support and they would lead the finishing blow to her. He then mumbled that they would try to draw the dragon that way, and then he asked Luke to get himself to a safe distance. Luke complied with his suggestion. Luke then started thinking that he was so pathetic, as even though his skill had evolved, when it came to battle, he was still useless, and now, at any rate, he must do whatever he could in this moment. He then noticed Garnet and went towards him, and he realized that he had lost a lot of blood, but he was still breathing. He held him in his hands and asked him if he could still hear him, but then he noticed that his face was almost completely crushed. He then wondered if there was still time and realized that if he ignored the armor and focused on the body, then he might do it. He then felt something and mumbled that the dragon's breath reached all the way out here, and then he realized that if they didn't move, they would be in range of a direct attack, and even if he could escape, Garnet would be in danger. He then noticed a sword and thought that it was sink or swim time. He then took the sword and blubbered that if he made the repair target the dungeon wall, that he merged with the sword, and then he used the earth as the raw material to compensate, then he could make it. He then activated his skill and created a wall in front of him to protect Garnet, and then started thinking that as someone who was abandoned for being useless, how could he even think of abandoning someone else at death's door? The wall then disappeared after the dragon's attack, and he exclaimed that it was not bad, considering he had never tried it before. He then started healing Garnet, saying that he always caused him trouble, and asked him to better be ready to apologize to him for every single time he bit his head off. He then encouraged him to come back, and after a while, Luke was relieved as the healing was done, but then he got shocked when he realized that Garnet was a girl, and she was half naked too. Garnet came to her senses and stood up, saying that she would kill that bastard, but then she fell down. He asked her not to try to move yet and told her that he fixed her wound, but he couldn't restore the blood she lost. Garnet wondered what wound and then remembered that she was hit, and then she realized that her armor broke and she was half naked. She became embarrassed and hid her chest and asked him if he saw. Luke tried to explain to him, saying that he couldn't help it as he had no idea that she was a woman, and then he offered that he would fix her armor, and then he asked her to just turn around. He then started repairing her armor and thought that Garnet, it was true that it could be a man or a woman's name, but he had never guessed that under all that armor, there would be a woman's body. He then completed the repair and told her that it should hold for now, as it was not like they were on the front line, and now they would just wait for Sakura and others to finish off the dragon. Garnet then called him and asked him if he wasn't going to ask why she was hiding her sex. He replied by saying that he assumed that she didn't want him to know her reasons, and if that was so, he wouldn't force her to tell him. She then clenched her fist and shouted out his name. Luke startled and asked him not to get too excited or she would pass out. She then explained to him that she owed him an apology, as she knew she was pretty rude to him before. He agreed with her and asked her if it wasn't that because she thought he was smuggling mithril. She then questioned him by asking him who told him that, and then she realized that it had to be Felix, as he was always sticking his nose in. Luke then calmed her down, saying that she didn't have to tell him anything she didn't want to. Like he said, he was sure she had her own reasons. She stated that she wouldn't make any excuses, because if her mother knew she was still clinging to her pride, then she would kill her, and she was most sincerely thankful to him for healing him, as she would be dead if it weren't for him. He became impressed and mumbled that he had no idea she could be this forthright, and then he accepted her apology, saying that it was all under the bridge, and even him seeing something, he shouldn't have seen anything. She then became annoyed and called him a jerk, and told him that he should forget about that no matter what. He became afraid and explained to her that he was not talking about anything lewd, and he just meant her face. Suddenly they heard a sound, and he uttered that it looked like they defeated the dragon. Garnet became annoyed, saying that she didn't get a chance to pay the dragon back. He then advised that for now they should head back to meet up with the others, and then he asked her if she could stand and offered his hand for help. She stood up herself and blubbered that she could stand on her own just fine. He complied with her and thought that now she was sulking. He then asked her if she was okay meeting up with the others like that. She told him not to worry about it, as Felix and Bradford had seen her face before, but neither of them knew that she was a woman, as their order had this stupid antiquated rule that only allowed men to join. He then remembered that Felix referred to Garnet as he. She continued by telling him that this was the reason why she had been pushing the idea that she was the commander's little brother, and then she warned him that he couldn't tell a soul about this. He realized her situation and thought that her reason for wanting to be in the order must be something big if she was going so far to hide her sex, and he couldn't say he was not curious, but it was none of his business. Luke then noticed that Garnet stopped behind him. She then called him and asked him if he saw what she saw. He then asked her what she saw. She then showed him and asked him what the hell was that huge hole, as she didn't notice anything like that on their way there. He then explained to her that that stuff might be the reason why she didn't notice before. She then asked him if he was talking about the ID. He replied to her by saying that it was probably covering the hole when they passed through earlier. She then mumbled that something gigantic must have burst out while they were heading down into the caves. Luke blubbered that he would imagine so. She then uttered that she just thought of something awful, and then she asked him to think if the dragons that appeared in Sundale Forest most likely came out of that hole, because the guild wouldn't have noticed a hole there either. Luke exclaimed that they really had to warn them, when suddenly Garnet asked him what the hell was that. He noticed that the hole was closing. He then explained that that was a pretty common trap mechanism for a dungeon, but if there was the mechanism out there, then that meant that the dragon must be the part of the trap. She then asked him if he thinks that someone was controlling the dragon. He answered her by saying that he didn't want it to be considered, but if he was right, then there must be a switch that activated the trap. Garnet then asked Luke to look over there, as there was a person right under the hole. He became shocked and started running towards the person. She asked her to wait a second, and he replied to her by saying that he would come back quickly. He then went towards the person and asked her if she was okay. The woman twitched her hand, and he noticed that and mumbled thank goodness, as she was still conscious. He then realized that the woman was Noor. Noor came to her senses and was in confusion. He then asked her what happened to her, as he heard that the rest of the party hadn't returned from the dungeon. Noor hugged him and started crying, saying repeatedly that she was sorry. He told her to just calm down and asked her what happened to the others. She answered him by saying that everyone was in the dungeon, but then suddenly she stopped and started trembling and quivering. He asked her what happened, while she heard a man commanding her to keep quiet unless she wanted to suffer. Luke became confused while Noor lost her consciousness and fell on the ground. Thanks for watching it, guys. Smash that subscribe button like it's your morning alarm clock.